for our seminar on UNRWA, which comes in light of the recent administration to cut all of its funding to UNRWA. And as we know, the US has historically been the largest donor of UNRWA, funding about a third to a quarter of UNRWA's annual budget. The seminar today will be in two parts. We will begin by hearing from Mr. Claudio Cordon, the Director of UNRWA Affairs in Lebanon. And then we'll have a short break and we'll have a panel with Professor Sari Hanafi, the leading researcher Jabir Sulaiman, and the youth activist Ammar Yousbashi. We had planned to have the meeting under the Chatham House rule, but we have a lot of media, so I think we will have just a normal seminar. First, I'd like to just introduce Mr. Claudio Cordon. He's the Director of UNRWA Affairs, as I mentioned, in Lebanon. He's been in this position since March 2017. He was previously the Director of the Human Rights, Transitional Justice and Rule of Law Division of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya. Previously, he worked with the International Center for Transitional Justice and with Amnesty International in a number of roles. He'll be speaking for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then will be followed with a question and answer period.
Thank you, Perla, and thank you all for coming here. What I thought I'll do is, you all, I suspect, quite familiar with UNRWA, but it's never harmful to go over again some of the basics in terms of where UNRWA fit into the overall international architecture. What do we actually do, including who are our beneficiaries, and you may discover things that perhaps you don't all know, and then focus on the funding crisis, on the generated by the US decision, but not only the US decision, and then some thoughts about the future prospects, if any. So let me start with, where does UNRWA fit into the international order? The departing point is the right of return. The resolution 194 that was passed in 1948 by the General Assembly resolution, a year before UNRWA was created. So UNRWA has no direct connection with that resolution. As you know, the language of the resolution is very specific in terms of what the right is. And it says that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live in peace with their neighbors shall be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date. And then there are provisions to give compensation both to those who return and to the refugees who decide not to return. Now, UNRWA is a humanitarian organization. Of course, we work very much in a highly politicized, polarized environment. We say, when we're asked, well, what do you think the political solution should be? So it's not us, it's not our role. There are other parts of the UN that deal with that. But of course, we exist because there is a need to support Palestine refugees until a just, a durable solution should be found. And as you know, the UN position as a whole is that there should be a two-state solution with Jerusalem as a shared capital. And that issues such as the issue of the refugees, the right to return, and everything else should be resolved through negotiations. Now, who is a Palestine refugees, and even why are they called, in our language, Palestine refugees and not Palestinians? This is because at the beginning, well, let me give you first the definition, which has gone through a number of reformulations, but the definition that has been used now for quite some time is person whose normal place of residence was Palestine during the period 1st June 45 to 15 May 48, and who lost both homes and means of livelihood as a result of the 48 conflict. And the status passes on to descendants of these refugees. Now, this is an operational definition, it's not a legal definition. Operational because UNRWA needed to define who is it that would be entitled to their assistance. So it includes non-Palestinians, and in fact, in the first years, we even had Israelis that were receiving help from UNRWA until Israel decided to take them over. That's why it says Palestine refugees. And here in Lebanon, we have Lebanese that were not Palestinians, that were living in Palestine, that meet this definition, and then came to Lebanon together with the others during the Nakba. It excludes some Palestinians. So if you're not a 48 Palestinian, you cannot be registered for UNRWA. This doesn't mean that you're not Palestinian, you're not entitled to the rights of return and so on. You just don't fit into our definition. So those who were displaced after 67, those who came to Lebanon in the 70s and so on, are not Palestine refugees, although they have access to our services. The issue of descendants. So this is actually a general principle. In order to maintain family unity, you're not going to say that the parents have a right to return and the kids don't. It wouldn't make sense. But UNRWA has a sexist approach to the definition. It's only through the father's line that the status of refugee is passed on. And finally, this is a resolution that has been endorsed by the General Assembly. And so it would require the General Assembly to amend it. So let me say 2 words about UNRWA and UNHCR. There's a lot of talk, a lot of confusion, deliberate or otherwise, about this issue. So UNRWA, as I said, was created in December 1949. No votes against. It was created by the General Assembly and became operational in May 1950. Our mandate is renewed every 3 years by the General Assembly. The last time it was renewed in 2016. Out of 193 members, 167 voted in favor, 1 voted against. No prize for guessing which state was that. There were 9 abstentions, including the US, and 16 states that didn't vote. The mandate goes on until 30 June 2020. Now, UNHCR was established a year later in 1950. They also had a 3-year mandate initially, but this has become permanent. I guess the world has recognized that refugees are always going to be there, whereas perhaps Palestine refugees at one point may have their case resolved. And in order to avoid duplication between UNHCR and UNRWA, there is an article in the Convention on Refugees that in the end is the terms of reference of UNHCR that make it clear that the convention doesn't apply to others who receive assistance or protection by another UN agency. UNRWA is not mentioned, but it was the only one, is still the only one that have a specific mandate for a specific population. But now, like UNHCR, also UNHCR, the status of refugee goes through descendants for the same principles that we said. So when you hear Netanyahu or others saying, we want UNRWA to be taken over by UNHCR so that we'll get rid of the issue of refugees who are descendants of those who were in Palestine in 48, it's simply not correct. Like UNRWA, like UNHCR, the preferred first solution to any refugee situation is repatriation, is return to your country. There are other solutions, such as integration in the country where you are, or resettlement to a third country that is part of what UNHCR does, but it's not part of our mandate. And in any case, any solution for a refugee requires the agreement, the consent of the refugee in question and of the host country where that refugee is or where may intend to settle in the end. Now, there is another paragraph in the 51 Convention that a lot of people are talking about, which says that when the protection and assistance provided by these other agencies stops for whatever reason, then UNHCR immediately, automatically will provide protection. This doesn't mean that if UNRWA stops existing, UNHCR will do the same things that UNRWA does. But it means that, at least in terms of protection, in terms of the basic rights, UNHCR will take over. However, we've been extremely clear, the UN couldn't have been clearer, in terms of there's no discussion about UNHCR taking over UNRWA. You heard it from the UNHCR Commissioner General, who happens to be the Commissioner General of UNRWA. You heard it from the Secretary General of the UN, who happened to be the High Commissioner for Refugees. So people that are at the highest level of the UN, who are intimately knowledgeable about this, have made it very clear that this is not on the cards, and in any case, again, it would require the General Assembly to vote to make that decision. Now, let me turn into what does actually UNRWA does and who does it serve. I'd like to highlight the fact that we do have what we call a medium-term strategy with 5 key outcomes. It's meant to last until 21. And the first pillar of this strategy is what we call protection. It's basically making sure that the human rights of the refugees are respected. So we've gone a long way from being just an assistant operation, you give food and so on, to recognition that all this actually has a human rights value that ought to be recognized. And then the other goals is providing health, education, and helping with the basic needs of the refugees. For those interested in this debate, UNRWA could be classified as much as a development organization, as much as a humanitarian emergency assistance, because in fact we do both things. Our schools' vocational training is not exactly emergency assistance, but when we get, like we did, Palestinian refugees from Syria and we need to support them, that's emergency assistance. So what are these services? Again, I don't want to bore you with lots of figures and things, but again, it's important to have a sense of what they are, because this is what really at stake if we can continue with our operations. So we have more than 500,000 boys in schools in more than 700 schools. Here in Lebanon is 37,000, including 5,500 kids coming from Palestinian refugees from Syria. And we have a vocational center with about 1,000 students. In terms of health, there are more than 3 million people who receive health care in our primary health clinics. We have 27 of those in Lebanon. And in Lebanon, we also support the cost of hospitalization that, as you know, are extremely expensive, and Palestinians in Lebanon don't have access to the public health services. And so that is one of the essential budgets that we have. We also have social services. More than 200,000 Palestinians receive social assistance. Here in Lebanon, we have 61,000 who are below the poverty line, that's about $6 a day, and who receive only $10 a month per person. But you'll be surprised how much demand there is for this minimum support. But we can afford to support only 61,000, although we have assessed and we know there are more that will need that. And then there's the works that we do in the 12 official refugee camps. Now, again, these are not UNRWA camps. They used to be called like that before the Civil War, as far as I have been told. They're called Palestine refugee camps, and this is because UNRWA is not responsible for running the camps. This is done by the popular committees that represent the Palestinian factions. What we do is take care of what we call shelters. These are basically the homes, making sure that the roofs don't fall on their heads, and do some basic work of that nature. All the sanitation, the waterworks, and of course the garbage. And I can have a separate lecture on the challenges of getting the garbage out of the camp and then joining the rest of Lebanon and figuring out where do you put it once it's out of the camps. One thing that we don't do, well, unfortunately, a lot of it goes there, is the paying for the electricity bills of the refugees. There are some misconceptions, including our foreign minister in Lebanon thinks that UNRWA should be paying those bills. Of course, we pay the bills in my office and everything, but Palestinian refugees are the ones meant to pay their own bills, and we are trying to facilitate discussions between popular committees, the government, the municipalities, into how we make a system whereby those bills can be collected, and then we can look at what happened in the past. The other specific things about Lebanon is that UNRWA is rebuilding an entire refugee camp. That's not about it. We haven't done it anywhere else. I'm not sure we'll do it again. This was, and there was an agreement between the international community in Lebanon that the camp, after it was destroyed in 2007, would be rebuilt more or less as it was, just in a shrunken way, and there are military restrictions and lots of other things that I won't go into the detail now. It was meant to be finished in 4 years. We are 11 years since then, and we've rebuilt about 55% of it. This is because, again, it relies on funding. It's a special, in a sense, it's like a special project. And at the moment, we have funding to go on until next March. After that, if we don't get more funding, all the construction work will stop. Now, the beneficiaries. Who are UNRWA beneficiaries? There are the Palestine refugees, as per the definition that I mentioned. But then there are other persons, and these are the families, effectively, of refugees who are not themselves refugees. So a Palestinian woman who marries a Sudanese or a Lebanese, her husband and their children do not become refugees, but can have access to our services. And then we have other, as I mentioned, we have Palestinians who came here in '67. They have access to our services. We have Palestinians who are not registered do not have Lebanese documentation for a number of reasons. And again, we provide, they're entitled to those services. So the beneficiaries are not exclusively Palestine refugees, but there are others that, for obvious reasons, I think, or humanitarian reasons, are entitled to that. Now, don't ask me how many Palestinians are in the country, because the answer is that I don't know, and I'll point you to the available data. The available data is the official census. It's an actually official Palestinian Lebanese census, 174,422 living in the 12 camps and in 156 so-called adjacent gatherings. So it was not by definition a national census, so by definition the number has to be higher, but nobody knows exactly by how much. Those who are at AUB, of course, will remember the AUB survey that was done in 2010 and confirmed in 2015. And using a different methodology, they came out with an estimate of between 260,000 and 280,000 Palestinian refugees in the country. What I can tell you for sure is that in 2017, we provided services to 204,000 beneficiaries. That includes mostly our Palestinian refugees, but then these other persons that I mentioned to you. What we know for sure is how many Palestinian refugees from Syria are here. Those, because we give them cash assistance once a month. There are, at the last count, slightly more than 29,000. And we define them as those who came to Lebanon after 15th of March 2011. And again, those interested in these statistics, we have the levels of poverty are 65% according to AUB among Palestinian refugees from Lebanon and 90% among those from Syria. Unemployment 23% for PRLs, as we call the Palestinian refugees from Lebanon, and 52% for those from Syria. In terms of who lives in the camps, it's according to the census, is effectively the majority of Palestinians live outside the camp, 55% versus 45%. And there are some camps like Shatila where you only have by now around 30,000 Palestine refugees, or Palestinians actually. And then, the majority are Syrians and so on. So this is actually what is going to be the basis for an interesting discussion with the Lebanese government, the municipalities, other agencies, because we take care of the whole population of the camp. But given that we are in dire need of money, we should have a discussion about, given that we serve others, perhaps there should be ways of compensating to some extent for their work. Let me now get to the issue of the funding and some of the more political things that have been said around the question of funding. So first of all, UNRWA is funded through voluntary contribution by states. There's only a very small proportion that comes from the central UN budget, like the salaries of international people like me. But all the rest of the funding, and it's about, we need about 1.2, 1.3 billion a year, comes from voluntary contributions. There was a discussion last year about, at the General Assembly, about increasing the proportion of the budget that comes from the UN. There was a strong opposition by countries that, again, you can imagine, and in the end it was decided not to push it. I suspect this will come back into play. Our funding is what we call the core for the core budget, but then also we have 2 emergency appeals relating to Syria. That what gets us the money to fund our operations primarily in Syria, but also for the Palestinian refugees here from Syria here, and for the West Bank and Gaza, for the occupied Palestinian territory. This is also, it's a separate source of funding. This has also been badly affected. And then we have projects. Again, many countries would rather fund a particular project than just put money into the overall budget. I mentioned Nahr al-Barid, but we have schools. There's a new school being built in Saida. The rebuilding of parts of Nahr Ain al-Hilwa comes also from a Japanese project, and so on. And in fact, half of the budget of the Lebanon office is made of projects. So you can imagine how much time is spent looking for administering grants, project funding, as well as deciding how to handle the core budget. The problem of the funding for UNRWA precedes the U.S. decision. It's no secret that we've always been struggling every year to get to the end of the year. Last year, there was a report of the Secretary General that outlined some measures that were being suggested in order to try to make the funding more stable. One was to create a World Bank trust fund, and this is more or less going to happen. It was also to create a Waqf, and the Organization Islamic Conference has agreed to that. These are all very important, valuable initiatives, but they will take time, and also the amounts that they produce are not such that would do away with the need to have significant contributions from states. So just to give you the figures of this current crisis, when we started in January, and when the U.S. decided to give 60 million only, they normally give 360, they gave only 60 million, and they said you cannot use them for Syria and for Lebanon. We faced a gap of 446 million. And through huge efforts, including with countries that hadn't usually contributed to a large extent in the past, we managed to reduce this by half. But we're still in need of more than 200 million to be able to continue to function beyond September to reach the end of the year. And then we're going to start next year with probably a few months funding, and we'll start again chasing for funding to reach the end of the year. Now, in order to partly deal with the crisis, but in any case, in general, to try to make the best use of the money that we have and last as long as we can, we had already taken a number of measures in January, and they are still into effect. These affect primarily our staff, because the priority was to keep the services going at all costs. So, for example, our staff is due a salary review since last September, when the government of Lebanon decided to give the public sector salary rises. Automatically, our employees are entitled to have a review, and eventually, if that's the case, get a salary rise. We suspended that. We haven't implemented that yet. We stopped retirement age is now 60, is no longer 62. We're not replacing many of the vacancy. We've charged more for transport fees. Many of our employees are being transported from various parts of Lebanon, for example, to Beirut and so on, and other cost savings measures. We also had a discussion with the Palestinian community this year about merging a number of schools and reducing the time some of the clinics are open where there are least patients. These actually are not related to the crisis. This, in a normal circumstances, would have been considered normal sort of cost efficiency measures. But there was a very strong objection on the grounds that this was seen, regardless of the intention, regardless of what objectively they were, as implementing a plan to takhlisat, reduce the services, implementing the plan of the US, etc. And we decided in the end not to implement it this year, although I think it was a missed opportunity. But we also operate in an environment where we do need and we do value the consultation with the community. with the country that hosts us, and so on. Let's get now to the U.S. decision, because the statement of 31st of August is actually interesting in many ways. So when the U.S. announced that they were stopping funding for UNRWA, they gave a number of reasons in that statement. One was the issue of burden sharing. They said, why should the U.S. bear what they consider an disproportionate amount of the cost? Now this would be less valid, because thanks to our effort, we have diversified the donor base, and so in that sense, this has less of a value, that argument. As an organization that is funded voluntarily, we of course regret the decision, but also we cannot say there was any obligation on the U.S. to give us the money. However, we reject the other statements that were made at the same time. The description of UNRWA as irredeemably flawed operation. It amounts to more or less the same. It's not clear whether this refers to our management, to the way we're working, and it would be very hard for them to do so, because just in December, the U.S. had signed the agreement that they were going to give us the same amount of money as in previous years. And then a few days later, Trump made a decision about Jerusalem, and all of a sudden, our funding disappeared. But we have evaluations from the U.S., we have evaluations from the EU, we have the World Bank that can testify that, of course, we're not a perfect organization, but that actually we're very good value for money. We have a program of reform that is ongoing. So this issue that this is a corrupt, failed organization cannot be backed up by any proper assessment. So what they're really talking about, and again, I'm just quoting the statements, is looking for alternative models. The U.S. will intensify dialogue with the UN, host governments, and international stakeholders about new models and new approaches, which may include direct bilateral assistance from the U.S. to other partners. So basically, UNRWA should go, and it should be replaced by others. The others is not very clear. Now, one thing that has happened, and it's not a secret, clearly the U.S. has offered the host countries to be paid in order to carry out the service that UNRWA does. There was an interview with the Jordanian foreign minister. When he was asked this, he said, well, yes, there was some discussion of that, but basically it's a non-starter. Jordan is not prepared to do that. Lebanon has said the same thing. All the host countries have been very clear that they are not prepared to replace UNRWA. I told you before about the UN agencies. I'm not sure there's any NGO or others that can run services for the sort of numbers that I mentioned. So in this respect, then there isn't an obvious solution, and we don't know what the alternative is. Perhaps it will be in the deal of the century when and if that is announced. One thing that the U.S. is also saying is that, contrary to rumors, they will not lobby for others not to fund UNRWA. But we'll see how that works. So in response to this, we said we have a mandate. We'll continue to implement it. We are fairly encouraged by a number of countries that have come forward to say that they will increase their contribution. It's not clear, the figures are not clear yet. Some have already done it. The UK has come up with 9 million. Germany has announced a significant increase in their contribution. They haven't said how much yet. There is a meeting at the General Assembly, on the side of the General Assembly, on the 27th of September. It was initially co-chaired by Jordan and Sweden. Sweden with Jordan have been among the most active, in particular the foreign ministers, in terms of supporting us, but others are joining in. Japan, I think Lebanon is also going to be part of that, and others. And the Secretary General, again, will be personally involved in trying to make sure that we resolve this crisis, that we get to the end of the year before we start next year. So in terms of what does the future looks like, other than a future of continued struggle to manage to be able to not just provide services, but actually, to maintain the quality, because that's the other important thing. Well, first, we can expect that when the mandate comes up for discussion, and it's probably towards the end of next year, the issue of should UNRWA exist as a whole and the definition of refugees and other things will be debated. Given the level of support that we've had so far, I doubt that there will be much appetite for changing that, but you never know. On the ground, you may have heard rumors about possibly considering stopping UNRWA's operation in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, or even in the whole of the West Bank. I haven't seen denial or confirmation from the Israeli government on that, but this is something that's being talked about as a possible next step. But I guess the most important thing is, UNRWA is a temporary, imperfect solution because of a political crisis. Now, is this crisis going to be resolved through negotiation or through some form of imposition? This is something that also the international community as a whole needs to decide how they're going to engage if the choice of imposing a solution as opposed to negotiating one is taken, with the consequences that may have. In the meantime, we are, as I said, determined to continue to provide our services, but we need concrete support, not just political support. When it comes to Lebanon, there's something beyond the political support that Lebanon can give us, and we look forward to the removal of the restriction on the right to work of Palestinians. This is actually, there is consensus among the 7 top parties here in Lebanon. It was reflected in this thing called the Unified Vision on Palestine refugees. It was announced last August. It was something that the Lebanese Palestinian Dialogue Committee, which, as you know, is an office in the Office of the Prime Minister, had coordinated. With the lack of government, it's difficult to pursue this, but this is definitely something that we're keen to implement. And this is because for those who think that improving people's life, Palestinians' life, amounts to tawteen, I just don't see the logic. People don't have to live in misery to maintain their rights, including the right to return. They don't need UNRWA, they don't need restrictions on the right to work, they don't need restriction on property to be able to maintain that. On the contrary, they should be able to live in dignity like anybody else, waiting for a solution to their plight. So to conclude, I think I've been clear in trying to explain why UNRWA is not the problem. We're not protracting a problem. The problem is the world, the parties first of all, and the world who cannot work out a durable and a just resolution. And for as long as, so the problem is not caused by the existence of an agency, of a humanitarian agency. I'd be very worried about those who think that disruption is the strategy. If by disrupting you mean stopping UNRWA, more or less all of a sudden, there may well be mass reaction, individual reactions, and as you know, there is enough powder kegs that haven't exploded yet, in addition to the ongoing explosion of the Syrian conflict and others, that could easily then degenerate into something that I think everybody will regret. So in conclusion, I think Palestine refugees, like all refugees, require just a durable solution, and anything else is really playing with fire. And I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this enlightening discussion. We can take questions
Or comments.
or short comments.
We have a Center for Refugee Rights called الأنروا. 3 years ago, we asked your secretary just to ask you that if it's possible that you just give information and lectures for the students about the establishment of UNRWA and the points including within it, including the preface about right of return. And until now, it passed 3 years, and we didn't hear that you are teaching such thing which is original. I am not asking you to teach something political. Just the establishment of UNRWA, you have this, you know, it's by the Secretary General. It's not more than that. This is one thing. The second thing, I worked for UNRWA a long time ago. And there was a dispute over the issue of registering part who are not refugees. Whenever they say that they started to register under the logo of gender equity, the sons and daughters of refugee women, like what happened in Lebanon. In some countries like Lebanon, they never give services to the Palestinians. And all the time saying that they don't have enough money to provide services for the refugees. So, and they continue to practice this. And this, I guess, it's an underground policy to give understanding that the number of refugees are not correct. That's it. Thank you.
Would you like to take 3 questions maybe?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll take 3 questions at a time. Yeah. Ammar, and over there. فيك
لسه بيعرف إذا ما بفهم بس تفضل.
خلال الاعداد للسنسس للاحصاء اللي اعدته البي دي سي كان كثير في كونفليكت، يعني لو ما كان مبين بين الأنروا والال بي دي سي حول الاحصاء اللي عم ينعمل واللي طلع. هلا وانت عم تحكي حضرتك كثير اعتمدت على الاحصاء، يعني depending according، ومع انه كان الظاهر ان الأنروا ما كانت مبسوطه بالاحصاء، ففي تغير واضح حول الاحصاء اللي يعتمد.
One more.
We didn't measure your experience in Gaza, which is very special. We're not only giving services for some refugees, we're giving the whole society, which is in big crisis due to the siege of Israel. I think the budget give us some idea about how to distribute these money coming in the budget for Gaza and for the others. This is which indicates the policy of UNRWA giving parts of the budget here and there is not ruled by the intervention of the Arab regimes, even those who are receiving and hosting the Palestinian refugees. It's only properly by the UNRWA staff. How can we understand that one day there is a big crisis about deficit, second day, okay, we heard about $50 million from Saudi Arabia, another 50 from Emirates, another 50 from Qatar, so 350. 350s can solve the problem of the deficit. How can we control in our minds that this deficit also one of the problems and the cards to be played on the right of refugees and the right of existence for which you explained very quite clearly, the link between UNRWA and the right of refugees.
Should I? Maybe let me start from the end. I mean, the budget thing is very complex, but we need the flexibility. We have 5 fields, as you know. So many of the decisions have to make centrally as to which program you fund, how much you give to each of the fields, and so on. So, for example, in Gaza, when we had the marches for the return and so on, and you saw all the killing and everything, we had to add 10 million to the medical services. So we increased the budget. We also receiving these emergency appeals that I mentioned to you that are funded separately by countries. And again, there's been a drop in funding there. So to some extent, we've absorbed some of the activities in the core budget, which already has a huge hole. So there's only so much you can do. And that's why in Gaza, for example, we did not renew the contract for 200 and some people. These are all very difficult decisions. And as I said, and our staff have been remarkable in that respect. We tried as much as possible to not to touch the services until we really can't stop. You could make decisions. For example, we stop the schools, we run the clinics, or we stop Lebanon and we concentrate on Gaza. But at some point, these decisions don't really make sense. Either the world wants an organization that functions, or there's only so much you can do by rejiggling the little money you have. But these are decisions that are made centrally for good reason, because there's, and then there's Syria. There's an ongoing war there, and things change, etc. So that's in terms of the budget. I'll go backwards from in the order of the question. I know there's all kinds of rumors about what UNRWA things say, what I've dreamt, and so on. There was never an issue with the numbers of the census. There was an issue with some Lebanese politicians who openly questioned the figures. But the census was done professionally. There's no reason to dispute that. But one needs to understand what a census is. A census is you count people over a week in July in those restricted area, and then you come up with those figures. We have not done a census. Nobody else has done an alternative census to be able to say, no, we agree, we disagree. I try to explain what we can count, the people that we give services to, but that doesn't amount to. These are not all the Palestinians that are in Lebanon, for the reason that I mentioned. So I think it was a useful exercise. I'm looking forward to the day when they will publish a full report on the census. I know they're still working on it, and at that stage we can then have a better comparison with the figures. In terms of there was a question about, your question about, teaching. It's this wouldn't be an issue. You just need to train the teachers to teach that as well. I think we're more concerned that they learn more useful things than the history of UNRWA, but we can certainly arrange that for those who are interested. But I'd be happy to meet you and our education department and discuss this in more detail. I'm not sure there were other. There's another important thing that needs to be stressed. That in Lebanon, it's true there are severe restrictions for medical assistance, right to work, and other things that I mentioned. On the other hand, we have about 6,000 Palestinians in Lebanese schools. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Education is not able to tell us how many are those are registered with UNRWA or not. So, and we take a few Lebanese and a few Syrians in our schools. For example, those who live in camps don't really have any option, and we make some exceptions, although we're under pressure to, again, limit as much as possible ourselves to the core refugees. So that's another interesting discussion that we have to have.
Yeah, there was Dr. Maher Sharif.
شكرا لمداخلتك. إذا سمحت لي عندي سؤال يتعلق بخطاب المسؤولين الكبار للأنروا عندما يقومون بحث الدول المانحة على زيادة مساعدتها أو على الالتزام بمساهماتها المالية أو على عدم وقف هذه المساهمات. غالبا يقدمون حججا تقول أن وقف هذه المساعدات سيؤدي إلى زيادة الفوضى في المنطقة، إلى قيام هجرات مليونية جديدة نحو أوروبا إلى تحول الشبان الفلسطينيين الذين سيمتنعون عن مواصلة تعليمهم إلى متطرفين. باعتقادي يعني هذا النوع من الخطاب غير مناسب، يعني غير مناسب لمنظمة إنسانية هدفها هو بالأساس يعني حفظ كرامة الشاب الفلسطيني، احترامه، ضمان حقوقه الإنسانية بما في حقه في العودة. أما يعني التزرع بأنه الفلسطيني الشاب يعني سيتحول إلى متطرف أو حتى لا أقول إرهابي، يعني غير مناسب هذا لطلب الدعم من الدول المانحة. شكرا.
Yeah, just to go in this sense, a question about the budget. The spokesperson of the UNRWA said that at the end of this month, the money would be ending. So in the camps, teachers and parents of students are unaware if schools will be maintained for next month. So this will be decided in the 27th of September, or can we already say that schools will continue until at least the end of the year? Yeah, what can we know?
We'll take one more question from Sari and then we'll do another round. Okay, 3 at a time.
Sari Hanafi teach transitional justice at American University of Beirut. I have been teaching some of your writing. I'm so glad when I learned.
I haven't written that much, but
yeah, I mean your work on as a program director of MENA, of International Center for Transitional Justice. So you we follow the statements you did in Morocco, in Tunisia, and etc. But I mean, why I am saying this? Because how would you apply if we consider Palestine, the case of Palestinian refugees, it's a kind of situation in conflict / post-conflict, because transitional justice can be implemented during the conflict also to mitigate some of the incidents. How would you apply the 5 mechanisms of transitional justice? Why I'm asking that about for 2 reasons. First, I think UNRWA historically has been reluctant to take seriously to help the Palestinians on the governance of refugee camps. I think, and the vetting and institutional reform is one of the pillars of the transitional justice. And the second reason, I think, I don't know how would you operate without addressing the question of memory, memorialization, right to return, come here, but also why Lebanese are reluctant to give the right to work and to own a property to Palestinians. I mean, this is something fundamentally important if you want really to resolve radically the problem, the endemic problem of UNRWA.
We'll take a round. We're taking 3 at a time. And
yeah,
then
just
Sorry.
my mind space is limited. Okay, let me start with the budget, because actually somebody made some other points that I meant to answer. We are a bit stuck with this thing of the budget. Most people don't believe it, that there's a crisis, including our staff. What you have to say, okay, I'll stop your salary so that you believe that there's a crisis. When we managed to reach, we started the year, we didn't know we had money until June. Then money started to come in, and then we said, okay, we have money until July. Then we said, we don't know if we're going to be able to open the schools. 16th of August, the Commissioner General says, I made a decision, we open the schools, but we have money until September. I can see why some people say, I don't believe, even Kushner said, they would always threaten us to close the schools, and then they don't do it. This was the leak email that was put in the foreign policy. So it is a genuine problem, but we can only be truthful with the reality, which is, in fact, one that we are an organization that basically now lives month by month, which is not a way to run any organization. It's not even respectful for the people who don't know if they're going to have a salary at the end of the month and so on. So the budget crisis is real, and at this stage I can't tell you whether we're going to be able to continue beyond September. Since the announcement of the US cut, and we said we need 217 million, we had, the UK and other countries have come forward with some figures. We expect some more. I presume the 27 will be a good moment for countries to say, we're putting on the table that much. So, hopefully we'll get more money. Whether that will take us to the end of October, to the end of November, that's what we don't know. And it's a genuine uncertainty. I don't think anybody is hiding anything. I think your point is very important. And actually, the first point that we always make is that Palestine refugees need to be supported because they deserve that. It's a right. Everything else is additional. But the fundamental reason why UNRWA exists and why they should be supported is dignity. We even have a campaign called Dignity is Priceless. We have, we underscore that point. And that's why UNRWA also moved into having protection, having human rights at the center of its work. So it's not even charity. These are individuals who do have rights. And this should be the first and only reason to support them. Now, it also happens that if you do put thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, all of a sudden you cut their support, they don't have other means, then this would create some disruption. And some may even join some other some organizations who would happily recruit. So these are not made up stories, but that shouldn't be the main reason. The same way as some are trying to leave Lebanon, leave other countries, and go to Europe. Every delegation of Europeans that I take to a camp, the first question that young people ask them says, yes, give me money if we can here, but frankly, I'd rather have a visa and come to Germany, to Denmark, or to Sweden, and I want to leave here. And to the extent that that may wake up people who are do not have much of a human interest, but that are worried about other things, it's worth pointing out to those dangers, even though that should not be the reason only to fund UNRWA. And frankly, nobody can really predict what's going to happen in that respect. But you're right. The first and foremost reason why Palestinian refugees should be supported is because they have a right to that support. Now, Sari, I think we should have a separate discussion, a seminar on all the issues that you raised that are very important. I mean, I would start by dealing with the truth. This is one of the most misrepresented conflicts. There are still plenty of people who believe that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land. The reasons of the Nakba, how did it happen, how many people, all that is still disputed. Although more outside Palestine and Israel than within Israel, because many of the people there know, and they can see the stones of the villages, and they know what happened. So, but there's still work to be done in that respect. The same with, even acknowledging the right to return would be an important step, and then there can be a discussion as to how you go about implementing it, and so on. The other important thing is accountability. We are very much for any of the crimes that are taking place, for those responsible to be held accountable, whether they are Palestinians, Israelis, or others. The governance of the camps is a difficult issue. And I think there should be a discussion that should happen also with the Lebanese government and with the Palestinian faction about how to improve things. One thing that would help is if we could change the representation on the political committees. In my year here, every political committee that I met, a popular committee that I met, I found only one woman. They're all men, and they're all men of my age. And the young people and others, no wonder they don't feel engaged, and that's not good. This is taking aside all the political and other things that are going on that play a role. Not to mention the military, the side of things with the factions that fight each other. We still have now Halwa is shut down tomorrow. We don't know if there's going to be a resumption of fighting. That incidents in Mimia and all the rest that makes an already difficult situation particularly difficult. That's a delicate discussion. It's something that I think would be certainly worth having, but it's again beyond what we can do ourselves in the immediate.
We'll take sure, yeah, and then Mike. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, we'll talk this way.
I want to ask you about what the Americans they say that they want to decrease the number of refugees to 10%, and the Israelis they thank them about that. But Mr. Pierre Krimble, he redefined the refugees, which is the refugee and his son and his grandson. So is it possible, if you hear something about that information, would you please inform us about this issue? Thank you.
Can we just the mic this? Oh, Amen.
Okay.
We'll take both questions. I mean,
Hello. Yes, I stand so you can see me. As you mentioned, there are a lot of people who are living in the camps who are not of Palestinian origin, or who are not Palestine refugees. There are Lebanese who used to live in Palestine. These are legally, they should be there and accepted. But if you, of course, you go to the camps, but the camps are full of people who should not be there. And this is, first of all, the camps are becoming extremely crowded. It is an extra expense for the UNRWA because they have to pay for more electricity, for more water, for more garbage.
Not electricity.
No?
No kahraba.
No, no garbage. Okay, okay. What about garbage removal? And also, it is very much affecting the people who are living within, because it has become so congested. We are having a lot of problems, like social problems. It's impossible to keep living this way. It is miserable. So I think after working so many years in the camps, hoping to see the light, I don't see any improvement, and more people camping in, and nobody is saying anything and making a living. Some people are even going in, building a building, renting it out, and nobody tells them anything. And there are some people also, and I'm facing it, they are asking for money in order to leave a certain premise, and they have no right to be there in the beginning. So what is the UNRWA? I have talked to Carol Mansour a lot about it. So what is the UNRWA? I mean, it will be the first step you can do to start cleaning up the camp, so we will know how many Palestinians are there, what we should be doing, how we can improve life in the camp. This is what I think.
I want to ask about UNRWA, but I feel I also want to say something that these natural camps don't have Palestinians only, just as a quick response to the latest comment. I want to ask, does UNRWA have a strategy after the U.S. latest positions? And does it have a strategy, but doesn't declare it, or doesn't have a strategy? And if not, does it plan to have a strategy? And what is the method? I mean, you will consult communities, political factions, states, whatever, and to what extent it would be participatory. And I think all of these, there are political questions important for a durable solution as national justice, all of it, and there is practical suggestions. What I understood, there are scenarios, but it would be very powerful if UNRWA comes and say that we have this proposition for the international community and for states as a response, especially that UNRWA used to have to put strategies. Like I saw a strategy between 2010 and 2015. So I think now there is a need for such thing.
Okay, back first to the issue of the definition of refugees. I mean, Pierre, the Commissioner General, didn't invent anything. He was just being very clear that what I said at the beginning, that the UNRWA's definition of refugee, particularly the descendants down to whatever generation, is not unique to UNRWA. UNHCR does the same thing. We have Somali, Afghans, and others who are now beyond the first generation, and they are refugees. So this was in answer to the fact that, so that there's nothing specific about UNRWA. This is by now is kind of a general accepted principle and international principle. With regard to the oh yes, I mean I've seen the rumors about somebody in the U.S. is thinking there may be 40,000, then we saw 500,000. At the moment, until we actually see what numbers and what is the rationale, you know, anybody can speculate and can believe whatever rumors they have. We have our definition. There's an international law definition, and that's the one that we're following. And again, these in the end are decisions of the General Assembly. With regard to the camps, look, you know, people living in the camps are not exactly, it's not their choice. There are not pleasant environments. They are very difficult, and I don't feel that you know, it's up to me to pass judgment on those who, you know, try to rent a shelter or to others who are poorer than them or anything else. In any case, UNRWA is not a state, although, you know, we have lots of we're saddled with the problems of having, you know, to run schools and clinics and so on, but we don't have a security force. We don't run the camps. We're not a governance. So, you know, there is only so much that we can do in that respect. And that's really a responsibility of those who represent the refugees in the camps and of the Lebanese state in the end, in terms of you know, what should be the future of the camps. In terms of the strategy, well, again, first of all, UNRWA is implementing an international mandate. We're not some sort of a independent entity that we can announce we're going to do this or that. Our best strategy is to say we want to continue to provide these services and the protection side, and do it in the best possible way. We want people to feel confident that the money that they give us, we use it in the best possible way, in the interest of the Palestinian refugees and their families and so on. You know, beyond that, yeah, we can suggest, you know, how we run a vocational center better than other things and so on. We can say, and we have said, we want to expand the base of donors. We now, for the first time, we have people interested in UNRWA who are discovering even Palestinians in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and, you know, we're very keen to pursue that. But also that takes time, particularly in order to produce the sort of money that we will need. So in terms of strategy, in terms of donor strategy, we have expanded as far as we can. In terms of you know, efficiency and accountability, we are trying to do our best with the money we have. In the end, though, we are a UN agency, an international agency, and we need to follow the mandate that is given to us by the General Assembly.
Thank you. I think we will have to stop now. I know a lot of people have more questions, but we're already 15 minutes over schedule. We will take a 15-minute break, and then we will come back for the panel.
And you can ask me questions here. I'm not going anywhere.